Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London, and this morning I'm looking at a book from Cambridge University Press. It's a Cambridge Handbook. On this occasion it's a legal publication, and it's covering public-private partnership, intellectual property, governance and sustainable development, and it's been edited by Margaret Chon, Pedro, Roffe and Ahmed Abdel-Latif. And it comes to us from CUP together with collaboration with the Seattle University School of Law and the International Centre for Trade and Sustainable Development, or the ICTSD. Now, I've given the title of our review the following: a first-class new handbook and a great international collaboration for global community ECO-JARGON, because that's partly what you've got here. Let's have a look at it first of all. There we go, Cambridge Handbook Private, it's a hardback, Private Partnerships, PPPs, IP, Governance and Sustainable Development. All the nice words are there, don't worry about that. There's the spine, and then there's some quotes, quite a lot of quotes about this book. It's a heavy book actually, it's a nice paper. The inside back cover just has blurb about the authors, and the dust cover on the front has some basic information about the book, some of which I've used for the review. And obviously the book itself, they're actually at the end, there's a very useful conclusion. There's no index, but there's a very useful conclusion at the back, which I'll refer to at the end. But if we start at the beginning, there are lots of quotes which were obtained prior to the book being published, which are quite interesting, although a bit lengthy. Then you've got the basic information, which is repeated again, about what this book is about and who the people are who've written it. Then there's the front page there. It's very, very sort of global in its approach. There's the blurb from CUP about the book. Then you've got the content section, and you can see how it's structured and the names of the people who have been involved in the specific areas, the parts covered: public health, education and so forth, environment, governance. That's the four main parts. Then there's a conclusion. Then you've got some figures, information. Then you've got some tables as well, which go with it. Then you've got the list of contributors, of which there are quite a large number. You can see the people mentioned there. I can't go through them by name, but there are a large number of people who have collaborated with this book. It's an important book. It's a difficult book to read. I didn't find it easy at all. There's a foreword which does set the scene nicely, and I'll mention that in a minute. Then there are some acknowledgements. The foreword written by a particular individual, I'll mention him in a minute. Then you've got a glossary of terms, which is again very helpful to have. And then after that you've got the introduction itself. There's the end of the glossary, the introduction. Then the introduction is by the three main editors, and it sets the scene, the tone of it very, very quickly indeed. And it does try to put in perspective where we are at the moment with PPPs, IP and sustainable development. This is what we say anyway. It's now recognised that the politically controversial PPPs, that's public-private partnerships, enjoy what the editors Margaret Chon, Pedro, Roffe and Ahmed Abdel-Latif describe as an increasingly prominent role in addressing global development changes and challenges. CUP, of course, have brought together 27 influential contributors on these important and developing fields of law. So do begin the book by reading the excellent foreword from Ricardo Melendez-Ortiz, who's the head of the International Centre for Trade and Sustainable Development, because they are collaborators on this handbook. And the mission is simply explained, quote, building bridges between different stakeholders and advancing mutually acceptable solutions to complex issues. The team do that, I think, in spades. And can I just say, obviously, we've got a lot of words here which are quite contemporary in their usage, if I can put it that way. And sometimes I wonder what they actually mean. So you have to try to understand the meaning of what they're coming up with. You'll understand what I say in a few minutes. Because throughout, it's important to recall that the United Nations agencies and other organisations rely on PPPs to improve global health, facilitate access to scientific information and encourage the diffusion of climate change technologies. Again, as I've said, this is an area which is quite controversial to some people, but I think the book itself is a very useful contribution to the current issues that we're facing, depending on, as long as you recognise that there are problems, certainly climate change problems, that we need to address. If you don't, well, the book's probably not for you. Now, it's for the reason, as I say, because of what they're concentrating on, say the writers, that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development highlights their centrality, as they call it, in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Now, the word sustainable has always been a problem. It cropped up at the beginning of the century and was being used very substantially, but sustainable means to continue. And obviously the suggestion is if we don't have something that is sustainable, everything will fall apart. So you can see what the basic argument is. At least that's one possible interpretation of what the word sustainability means. And of course, at the same time, IP comes into this, because the IP dimension and implications of these efforts remain under-examined. And through selective case studies, what the authors have done is give a detailed and comprehensive work which contributes to a better understanding of the relationships between PPPs and IP. And of course that relationship is considered within a global knowledge of governance framework, because that's where we are today. Whether we like it or not, that's the position we are faced with. And that includes, of course, innovation, capacity building, technological learning and diffusion. Again, you notice the words that are being used here, and I said right at the beginning a little bit of a word of caution. It's actually not the easiest book to read initially until you get into it. And linking, of course, global governance of knowledge via intellectual property to the SDGs, it's the first book that we can recall to chart the activities of PPPs at this important nexus with considerable change on the horizon. And of course PPPs are now an essential feature of the global development landscape, and what the editors call, quote, a fixation in development discourse and practice. You get the general drift, I think, from what I said earlier about the way that they word some of the sentences. It is a global book, and I put it that way, but I mean, I'm not criticising in that sense, but just be aware that they do use words which are interesting. The title is, I think, a first attempt to look more closely at PPPs and IP within a more capacious knowledge of government framework. And the contributors, of course, are very knowledgeable people, review this relationship with a range of factors, including public health and other fields such as education, information and communications technology, the ICTs, libraries, agriculture and climate change, and that's really where you get them in the content section of the book. Let me conclude by saying we found the work quite a heavy read, but with perseverance the end results offer, I think, a fresh insight into one of the biggest issues we face today in global development challenges. So thank you very much to everybody for this important statement on the challenges for the 21st century, and for the final conclusion in chapter 19 on what is called the triple interface, containing Margaret Chon's findings and suggestions for future directions. I'll show you that in a moment. It's an important handbook, and it was first published on the 20th of September 2018. Here it is again. It's, as I say, a hardback, spine there, you can see, and then at the back, difficult to read that, but you've got some general idea. It's a heavy book, and as I say, just opening it in the middle, you can see this is the Marrakesh Treaty, PPPs and so forth, looking forward there. You just had some subheadings and a lot of footnoting all the way through, which is very useful. And again, you can see at the end of each chapter, you've got the actual footnotes and the detail of the footnotes, depending on what you're looking for. And the point I would make, which I raised in the review itself, is what's called the triple interface. This is findings and future directions by Margaret. She's done a very good job there, setting it all out. As I say, it's worth reading because that summarises effectively where we are at the moment and where we're going. Anyway, thank you very much to Cambridge University Press for this book. This subject matter is going to be with us for a very long time, and I think they've taken a really good approach, and so there will be more books of this nature coming along. Thank you very much to all concerned in the meantime. Bye-bye.